The views and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with the panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bound. And today, our panel will be answering listener emails. Our first question today comes from Thomas, who lives in Cleveland, Ohio. Thomas asks, we had another school shooting this week. Yes, Thomas, we are all very, very mindful and very sorry about that. What do you all think might be a response from the current lame duck Congress? I would say probably nothing.
Thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, you're not going to, they're a lame duck Congress, but they're still controlled by the Republicans, so you're not going to get anything passed through into there. The Senate can't do anything unless they have the House of Representatives on board. So basically, you're going to get the same thing that you always get. And some sick person is going to say, yeah, but it was only one student and one teacher that died. So it really wasn't all that bad. Which is absolutely an insane thing to say. But there's somebody's going to come out and say it. And, it's just Thomas, bad news. Nothing's going to happen. Absolutely zero.
Yeah, this is unfortunately the society that we live in. And I remember, I don't even know what year it was. I was over in Germany. I used to do marketing for a German software company. And I was over in Germany, and we had just had a big shooting. I don't remember. I think it was actually not a school shooting. It was the one in Las Vegas. And they just said, how do you put up with this? Like, how do you do it? And I didn't have an answer. I don't most Americans want some kind of gun controls, right? And we can modify that and say reasonable gun controls or modest gun controls or any gun controls. But the NRA pays the freight. And the craziest thing about that is that it's like after the 2016 election, we discovered that the NRA was funneling money from Russia, Russian mob guys, oligarchs, if you will, and basically shuffling that money into the Republican Party from Russia through the NRA. And somebody might have lost their job, but for the most part, the operation continues unimpeded. And it's bizarre to me that we can just turn away and let this continue to happen without doing anything about it. And I would say, like Biden got some modest gun controls through, first time in 30 years, they were kind of touting it. It's like not anything substantial, not anything that would be particularly helpful. And I think a lot of that is because of the various types of shootings like this one, Mark, to your point earlier, this looks like it might have been more targeted than just a random, I'm going to go in and kill everybody, and so that's a different solution set probably than the person who wants to go in and just shoot people randomly. And you might need a different set of laws to account for that. And you can always point to people who say, well, it's not going to help anyway, so why bother doing it? But it does seem to me that you'd rather do something rather than nothing. And you can't address all the problems. Like even when they did the assault weapons ban, people went out and used handguns. So, if you ban handguns, people will use assault weapons. There needs to be a little bit more comprehensive approach to this than anybody seems willing to take.
Yeah, and we seem to normalize it. and I think I've said this before, I'm a member of Lines International, and which does a lot of work with eyes, and we do eye screenings for children here in the community at the elementary schools. And I went to one last week to do the eye screening. And I will say this, if you're in K4 and K5, it should be illegal to be that cute, but because they're just absolutely adorable. It's K4 and K5, even kindergarten. Once you get to third grade, now they stop being adorable. But anyway, and I had to walk through a metal detector, and there was a sheriff's deputy standing right there at the front door. And I think that gives us this false sense of security. Now, I don't know what the security was like at the school in Wisconsin, but I can't see it being very much different than because it was like, I think it was a private school. I can't see it being a lot different. And the fact is that we've normalized it to the point where parents they walk in through these metal detectors, and everybody thinks that's just fine. And we get that idea that, well, we must be safe because we walk through the metal detector. And I walked through, and I had an eye screening camera with me, and the alarms went off. Not one single person checked that bag I had. Nobody came over to check that bag. They just, oh yeah, don't worry. What's in the bag? Oh, it's the camera. Oh, okay, fine. Nobody checked. So I'm sorry, but no, the security measures that you think are keeping you safe obviously are not. If somebody wants to shoot people, they will. And the answer is the availability of the gun. No, the gun is not the one that's responsible. I get that part. People kill people, guns are in their hands. But the fact is that it's the availability of guns. And it's just, we've normalized it. And the normalization of it is sad, but it's a reality. It's a reality in our country today. And I would agree with Scotch and German colleagues. I don't know how we put up with it. I honestly cannot figure out how we're so worried about immigrants, which may not impact a single person other than a very small group. And that's a big deal to us. But those people in Madison whose experiences, the people in Columbine, the people in Parkland, the people in, all these different places, and these were Americans that did it. These were not, immigrants or anything like this. These were Americans that did it. And we are not nearly as outraged by that as, oh, they're crossing the border. And again, it's just another sign of the population of the United States has lost its mind, and we basically don't pay attention to the things we should be paying attention to. There's a teacher and there's a student who are dead today, and they didn't have to be. They did not have to be. And if we put our mind to it, you would think that we could come up with a solution. The only problem is, as Scott says, the NRA they fit the bill right now for Congress, and nobody is going to stand up to that. That is the shame.
And I don't think that we should dismiss the cultural aspect of this. We talked about this last week with the CEO shooting in New York City, and how our entire culture is geared towards Second Amendment solutions, and people having violent reactions to things that they don't like. And it strikes me as I think I saw today that that shooter is getting charged as a domestic terrorist. The incredible thing is that from like 2017 to 2023, we went from like 4 threats a year to 20 threats a year against people. 250 people have been prosecuted for threatening. Something like 200 of the federal legislative, executive, and judicial officials, of which there are like 1,600 or so. And so 200 of them have been threatened. Domestic terrorism incidents have grown by like 350% or 400% between 2013 and 2021. The numbers are staggering because there are so many people who are just like angry about something, they have some kind of grievance, and they have access to guns, and a culture that seems to, at least on one side of the political spectrum, seems to, and actually I should amend that. I think both sides of the political spectrum believe in vigilantism now and believe that that political violence is acceptable. And I don't know how you backtrack from there and say, that we need to live in a society that's a little bit more civil to one another than that. And and their answers to it are like, well, we should arm teachers, to protect schools, right? We had in my kid's school student resource officers, a police officer at the front door. But we saw in Uvalde that a lot of armed men stood there afraid to go into the classroom while the killer inside was shooting children, and basically allowed that to happen. So the answer is not more guns. The answer has got to be less guns. And the answer also has to be a change in the culture where we're not so heated all the time and reaching for the gun. This young lady killed herself. And, I guess rather than just quietly kill herself, decided that she was going to go out and take people out with her. But it is a cultural issue as well as a hardware issue. And I don't know how to do something about that. I think that the only way that you can really address this is by taking the guns away from people as much as you possibly can, so that it is not as handy as apparently it was for this young lady and so many killers that we see.
Right. And I did know, reading a little bit about this, they have not yet decided whether or not they want to charge the parents, because now they are starting to do that, where they're charging parents to be responsible for this. But it also was brought out that they thought that this had to do with bullying at the school. So is the school also responsible if they're allowing this bullying to go on? So it'll be interesting to see how legally this turns out. Holding parents responsible, I'm a little on the fence about that one. It all depends on the parents. And again, I guess the way the culture is brought out to the child, whether they see this as, the parents are, dressing up in camo every weekend and going out and, playing army or whatever the heck they do, then I can see it, because now the child gets that's brought into their culture, their family unit. But I mean, again, will they charge the school if bullying was happening in the school and there's any kind of documentation to it, which there should be, or somebody just wasn't paying attention? Will the school be held responsible? So it'll be, like I say, it'll be interesting to see where legally this kind of plays out.
And what about charging the parents of the bullies for not making sure that their children aren't bullying, and making sure that their children understand how to treat other people and so on and so forth, and making sure that the parents aren't abusing those children at home and aren't neglecting those children at home? And one can see how the expansion of who is responsible and how the infection, if you will, of responsible parties and the need to have a cultural change in our communities, as you were saying, Scott, really is necessary, because everyone in effect then becomes responsible.
Yeah,
it gets uglier, when you look at the politics of this. I mean, the mentioning Congress. There was a study just about a year ago, January 2024, that I had noticed that done with the University of Chicago. And 15% of Americans, okay? So it breaks down as 12% of Democrats, 15% of independents, and 19% of Republicans agree that the use of force is justified to ensure members of Congress and other officials do the right thing. I cannot imagine that got better in the last year it's probably gotten even worse. And what it looks like now is that amongst Trumpers, it's like 10%. And so that's like 26 million people. Okay. 10% of respondents agree that the use of force is justified to prevent Donald Trump from being president. And, there are people who, as we saw, went out and tried to stop Donald Trump from being president by shooting at him. If we are taking that out on its face, and it's the numbers continue to be aggravating. More, I'm sorry, I should say slightly less. About 18 million Americans support the use of force to restore Trump to the presidency, right? And that group, is like half of them own guns, and 40% of them think that people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th are patriots, and a lot of them, like a quarter of them, know a militia member or themselves belong to a militia. So again, we're living in a society that has grown more violent, more thinks that violence is more acceptable, and has easy access to guns. One of those things has to change. And I don't know how you change people's, mental health here or the culture. I don't know how to do that. But I do know that, that the one thing that you could do is make access to guns more difficult, control it more, and hope that has the same effect that being a more pacified, peaceful society would have. But man, we're in a mess right now. This is a really bad state of affairs that we're in as a country.
Yep. So thank you, Thomas, for your question, and I do hope that we answered it. And thank you again to everyone for listening to the Nova Society, and we will see you next time.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.